So, you know, the 30-second version of the Zittrain story is there's going to be an I-9/11 event, which doesn't mean an Al-Qaeda event. What it means is an event where the instability or the insecurity of the internet becomes manifest, some major malicious event, which then inspires the government into a response. If you remember, after 9/11, the government dropped the Patriot Act within about 20 days, and it was passed. And the Patriot Act is huge. I remember somebody asking a Justice Department official, how do they write such a large statute so quickly? And of course the answer was, it's been sitting in the drawers of the Justice Department for the last 20 years waiting for the event that would allow them to drop it. And of course the Patriot Act is filled with all sorts of insanity about changing the way civil rights are not protected or protected in the United States. So I had dinner once, and Richard Clark was at the table, and I said to him, is there an equivalent? Is there a Patriot Act, an I-Patriot Act, just sitting waiting for some substantial event for them to come in and have an excuse for radically changing the way the internet works? And he said, of course there is.
I think people sorely underestimate the consequences of a large-scale cyber attack. There will be a cyber 9/11, and regrettably, I think that's what it's going to take before people really pay attention to this.
Have there ever been any cases where the FBI has investigated attacks against critical infrastructure?
Yes. 8 years ago, people flew planes into buildings. They're interested in having that same type of impact on this country, and they'll do it whatever way possible. And if they can do it through a cyber attack and have an impact on this country's economy, on this country's psyche, on the confidence of the American people, they'll do that.
The director of the CIA says a cyber attack against the U.S. power grid by a terror group is a very real national security threat, one that could cripple government systems and disrupt an already fragile economy.
We, as a nation, we are vulnerable. Let me give you two examples. A terrorist group that had cyber skills could attack the critical infrastructure of this country, particularly in the heat of summer or the cold of winter, and cause chaos. It could disrupt banking, it could disrupt electric power.
It can shut down power grids.
Indeed.
It's, 3,000 people died in 9/11. What if they unleash dams or poison water systems or just shut down grids, hospitals? Well, I mean, shut down air traffic control. So then on one of those soupy days, airplanes are just running into each other up in the sky. They could kill so many people so easily. And the miracle to me is that they haven't done it so far. And it's not to our credit. It's to the fact that it just hasn't happened. But it will.
If we adjourn without taking action on cybersecurity, shame on us, because it is inevitable with the number of daily attacks, whether it's from nation states or terrorist groups or hackers, that inevitably we are going to face a serious cyber attack. And I, for one, don't want to look back and say, all the warnings were there, why didn't we act?
Cybersecurity, which underpins all of these infrastructures, I think that a big crisis there, and it is coming. It is coming, there's no doubt about it. Given my background, I know that.
A cyber attack perpetrated by nation states or violent extremist groups could be as destructive as the terrorist attack on 9/11. Such a destructive cyber terrorist attack could virtually paralyze the nation. The most destructive scenarios involve cyber actors launching several attacks on our critical infrastructure at one time, in combination with a physical attack on our country. Attackers could also seek to disable or degrade critical military systems and communication networks. The collective result of these kinds of attacks could be a cyber Pearl Harbor.
And create and improve our defenses before a catastrophic cyber attack occurs, as it surely will, and then we come rushing back to raise our defenses, as we did after 9/11, after we've suffered an attack.
Now our enemies are also seeking the ability to sabotage our power grid, our financial institutions, our air traffic control systems. We cannot look back years from now and wonder why we did nothing in the face of real threats to our security and our economy.
Our country will, for example, at some point face a major cyber event that will have a serious effect on our lives, our economy, and the everyday functioning of our society. While we have built systems, protections, and a framework to identify attacks and intrusions, share information with the private sector and across the government, and develop plans and capabilities to mitigate the damage, more must be done and must be done quickly.
A top former energy official claims an attack on an American power grid was terrorism. One or more snipers opened fire in April, knocking out 17 transformers that send power to California's Silicon Valley.
When police arrived, the shooters were gone, but they found more than 100 shell casings from a high-powered assault rifle. No fingerprints. It seemed like a professional job.
But the man who chaired the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission at the time tells CBS News it could be an omen for a future attack. It is important to note that the FBI does not believe it was an act of terror.
Speaking at a security conference in Aspen, Colorado, Justice Department officials warned terrorists have said openly they want to use electronic attacks to do as much damage as possible to American infrastructure. The Washington Free Beacon reports one official pointed to a recent statement in a video by an al-Qaeda leader. He said they plan cyber attacks on infrastructure like the power grid or financial markets. And Gordon, that report also said they wanted to do as much damage to the U.S. as possible, almost to the likes of 9/11.
There's also the ability to false flag attribution. We talked about attribution beforehand. It's a matter of circumstantial evidence mostly, rather nothing fixed or approaching image intelligence, for instance. So therefore, it is certainly possible to spook these intelligence collection capabilities or otherwise imply that a separate actor, let's say a different country, was actually responsible for cyber attack.
This comes as a new report predicts that there's a catastrophic cyber attack likely causing significant losses of life and money by the year 2025.
Time to show you some of this morning's headlines. The Wall Street Journal says the director of the NSA expects a dramatic cyber attack on the United States in the next decade.
The head of the NSA, the National Security Agency, is acknowledging the U.S. does not have the defensive measures to protect the power grid from such hackers.
He said that there are defensive measures, but they're not certain, frankly, that they can head off this kind of attack. And they say that this is, with that knowledge, you have multiple nation states looking for the vulnerabilities to find the way in.
Some people have described this as significant as knowing about the hijackers pre-9/11.
The group that calls itself Guardians of Peace posted this threatening message today. It reads in part, "The world will be full of fear. Remember the 11th of September 2001. We recommend you to keep yourself distant from the places at that time."
How long until we have a digital Pearl Harbor here in the United States?
I think it's only a matter of when. There's three things that really concern me when I look at cyber from a threat perspective. Number one, it is only a matter of the when before someone uses cyber as a tool to do damage to critical infrastructure within our nation. I mean, I'm watching nation states, groups within some of that infrastructure. At the moment, it seems to be really focused on reconnaissance and attempting to understand the characteristics of the structure, but it's only a matter of time, I believe, until someone actually does something destructive.
My first reaction was Yahoo has 500 million accounts. I didn't believe it. And now I hear another 1 billion. That's distinct. So that trajectory is ramping up. We're headed toward a cyber Pearl Harbor, and it is going to come at either the grid or the financial sector.
American CIA hackers can also allegedly leave false breadcrumbs to mask the operation's fingerprints and make it appear that it was carried out by another country. That can be done by inserting malware components from a known Chinese, Russian, or Iranian hacking operation, for example, into a US one. There's evidence the CIA has been collecting malware components known to work in overseas cyber attack operations. The CIA declined to comment, quote, on the authenticity or content of purported intelligence documents, end quote. But if authenticated, The trove would be one of the biggest breaches in the spy agency's history. A spokesman for the White House also declined to comment.
Vital U.S. infrastructure, including the power grid, under cyber threat by Russian government hackers, potentially giving the Kremlin the ability to turn off the lights. The Department of Homeland Security and the FBI detailing a 2-year multi-stage effort by Moscow targeting the U.S. energy grid.
It was in the months prior to September 2001 when, according to then CIA Director George Tenet, the system was blinking red. And here we are nearly 2 decades later, and I'm here to say the warning lights are blinking red again. Today, the digital infrastructure that serves this country is literally under attack. These attacks come in different forms. Some are tailored to achieve very tactical goals, while others are implemented for a strategic purpose, including the possibility of a crippling cyber attack against our critical infrastructure.
Now more than 30 nation-states have cyber attack capabilities, and sophisticated digital toolkits are spreading like wildfire. DHS was founded 15 years ago to prevent another 9/11, but I believe an attack of that magnitude is much more likely to reach us online than on an airplane. As we speak, the bad guys are in our networks, checking for open windows or doors, and everyone and everything is a target.
And again, we'll have 10 seconds. Is a cyber 9/11 attack that completely redraws the battle lines going to happen in the next 10 years? So yes or no, 10 seconds, please.
We now have a breaking news update this afternoon on that power outage on Fort Bragg. Now, the Post has been conducting an exercise to test its security and operations throughout the installation. In order to do this, the power was cut off overnight. Now, it expects the lights to be back on within the next couple of hours now. So anyone using the American States Utility Service is going to need to adhere to the mandatory water restrictions.
And to me, that's more likely what we're going to see in the future from a cyber 9/11 is you're going to have some group or some entity that might or might not be associated with the government that's going to target and hurt civilians in order to either make a point, retaliate against the United States, very similar to 9/11. They don't believe in the principles of the United States or its government. They think we're evil and they want to cause harm or cause damage to us. The other variant of cyber 9/11 that to me can actually be just as worse is not only have some loss of life, but also target massive financial impact. Somebody goes in and tries to wipe out hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars from a large number of banks simultaneously. But the bottom line is this: the new battlefield is cyber. We live our life in cyber, and what you need to recognize, it's going to happen.
A coordinated cyber attack on cars could cause global gridlock.
But a new report by more than a dozen whistleblowers suggests internet-connected cars are a large national security threat. They compare the possible impact of a fleet-wide attack during rush hour to 9/11.
Suddenly, you're driving your car, the brakes no longer work, and the airbag blows up in your face for no reason. And what's going to happen? These cars are going to start smashing into each other. We're going to have collisions all over the place.
But what if that cyber attacker overtook the traffic lights, took control of the sewer systems, even the city's autonomous buses, sending them to crash into voting stations and killing people going to the polls? That's exactly what some of the top minds and top hackers here at Operation Blackout, a cybersecurity election day war room scenario put on here in Washington, D.C. A cybersecurity firm, Cybereason, brought together officials and agents from the FBI, DHS, and local law enforcement, along with top hackers, including former offensive military hackers, to imagine just such a diabolical scenario.
One of the ways Iran could retaliate is a full-scale cyber war. Former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Admiral James Stavridis, who's actually been on this program, says It's what he worries about the most, and it's been building since 2007.
And a stark new bulletin was issued to U.S. law enforcement over the weekend. It's blunt, stating, quote, Iran and its partners such as Hezbollah have demonstrated the intent and capability to conduct operations in the United States. And while no specific plot has been identified, the bulletin pointedly says, quote, an attack in the homeland may come with little or no warning. The bulletin also warns that homegrown radicals may try to take advantage of this tense moment, Amy.
And Pierre, the bulletin also specifically mentions a cyber threat from Iran.
Well, first of all, I would just say if you think about what a digital 9/11 would be, I think it's two things. One is it would be a government attacking, say, so that the electrical grid goes down, hospitals go down. That is what happened in 2017 with WannaCry, the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. A third of their hospitals went down. Cash registers, ATMs, everything stops working. That's what happened in Ukraine with the NotPetya attack. But ultimately, I think one of the worst attacks could be if we learned a week after an election that voting had been tampered with, that the voting rolls had been tampered with. I think if something like that were to happen, then I think we'd have a real issue.
Radix is about coming back from this. All right, a large, significant cyber attack that finds its way somehow through all of our best defenses and finds a way to black out the grid. And the reason why is because DARPA asks the hard problems in order to ensure that our nation is capable of responding effectively with our military forces overseas. And the best way to do that is to ensure that we have adequate critical infrastructure support when we're at home.
So we need to actually start this cooperation and understanding early so that when the crisis does hit, that we're in a position to respond effectively to it. And I would anticipate that when we do see this next crisis, it will be faster than what we've seen with COVID. The exponential growth rate will climb, be much steeper. The impact will be greater. And as a result, the economic and social implications will be even more significant. So I think it's really important that we don't underestimate the severity of what a crisis like this, the impact it could have. And it's going to take us, all sectors of society and the economy to come together to address that.
We all know, but still pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack. We have to ask ourselves in such a situation, how could we let this happen?
It's election day in an American town, but everything is going wrong. There's a bomb threat at the local post office, the 911 call center has been hacked and now offline. Traffic lights in the city are malfunctioning, and fake stories about COVID outbreaks among poll workers are circulating all over the internet. The town is adversaria, which thankfully doesn't actually exist. But it's the main character in a simulation organized by the information security company Cybereason, called Operation Blackout.
Imagine the consequences of a cyber attack that wipes or alters financial records, especially as the economy remains fragile in the wake of the pandemic.
All right, we're getting some new details right now into that massive SolarWinds cyber attack. We're just now learning hackers were able to break into Microsoft and access its source code.
A cyber attack with COVID-like characteristics would spread faster and further than any biological virus. COVID-19 was known as an anticipated risk. So is the digital equivalent. Let's be better prepared for that one. The time is now.
The next pandemic, the exposure that looks like a virus is cyber-related, because it has no geographic or time bound to it.
Tonight, we're learning more about a cyber attack forcing the shutdown of one of the main pipelines supplying gas and diesel fuel to the East Coast.
In the wake of recent supply chain disrupting cyber attacks, a senior U.S. Justice Department official told Reuters exclusively that the DOJ is elevating investigations of ransomware attacks to a similar priority as terrorism.
But the Russians and the Chinese and the North Koreans and the Iranians need to know that if they attack our infrastructure, they are going to get that back proportionately. And you know, how we do that, of course, is fairly classified, and the right way to do it is a little bit complicated, but we need to start melting people's equipment, emptying people's bank accounts, and setting up a deterrent.
We are now facing a huge challenge in this new world. The challenge of Gen 5 attack, a challenge of upcoming cyber pandemic.
This is an extremely dangerous situation. I believe that the next Pearl Harbor, the next 9/11 will be cyber.
But I think it's more likely we're going to end up, if we end up in a war, a real shooting war with a major power, it's going to be as a consequence of a cyber breach of great consequence.
But there are two ways in which what we have today is quite different from 20 years ago. First of all, this time the risk may not be physical, it may be cyber. And a lot of people think that the cyber risk is even greater than what we faced before.
Cyber risk is probably the biggest risk I think the financial system faces in the world. It's a global risk.
This is the single most existential threat to the financial system.
We are in effectively a war on cybersecurity.
You know, you mentioned earlier about, in your testimony also about cybersecurity, just by coincidence, in today's Wall Street Journal, we got risking Cybergeddon, and about a coordinated attack could shut down 80% of U.S. electrical grid.
Well, tonight, the nation's intelligence agencies are warning of cyber threats from Russia and are urging U.S. critical infrastructure defenses to be reinforced.
Just last week, 3 white supremacists pleaded guilty to plotting to attack power grids throughout the country, and they had a plan to hit critical substations simultaneously to cause a massive blackout.
Look, today my administration is issuing new warnings that based on evolving intelligence, Russia may be planning a cyber attack against us.
The attack on the Colonial Pipeline, some people say it was kind of like the attack on the USS Cole, right? Remember the USS Cole in Yemen before 9/11? And that at some point we're going to have our cyber 9/11, and it's going to wake everybody up. Everyone in America is going to say, what the heck have we been doing? Why have we been letting people get away with this? And I think we need to be trying to get ahead of that cataclysmic attack before it happens.
Wray also announcing the previously classified information about a planned cyber attack against Boston Children's Hospital by hackers last summer, sponsored by the Iranian government.
We got a report from one of our intelligence partners indicating Boston Children's was about to be targeted.
FBI agents contacted Boston Children's, which coordinated how to strengthen the hospital's defense, which ultimately prevented the attack. The feds crediting the relationship the FBI and hospital previously had.
Now, I was in the CIA and the Pentagon for many, many years, and we are all have to be careful not to fight the previous war and to make sure that we're adapting to today's threats, particularly on cyber. I'm worried that we've had, as we remember in 9/11, we had the attacks in Kenya, we had the attacks on the USS Cole, and then we had 9/11. And I feel like on our cyber attacks, we have had our USS Cole. We've had the Colonial Pipeline, we've had our meat processing facility, we've had solar winds. So we all thought about what would we have done if we could have imagined the threat of 9/11? What would we have done to better prepare?
First, it's around geopolitics. The most striking finding that we found is that 93% of cyber leaders and 86% of cyber business leaders believe that the geopolitical instability makes a catastrophic cyber event likely in the next 2 years. This far exceeds anything that we've seen in previous surveys.
Highly suspicious. That's one assessment of the computer network failure that grounded all U.S. air traffic last month.
So from my standpoint, it sounds like what we call a test attack, where they wanted to test and just see how vulnerable the systems were, whether they could get in,
and how long it would take them to recover.
And most recently, they've been fielding satellite radios or satellite communication to senators for use in emergencies in some of those state offices in the event of an emergency that takes out communications.
Recent reporting from the intelligence community's worldwide threat assessment by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence indicates that adversaries are particularly focused on improving their ability to launch cyber attacks that would disrupt critical infrastructure services within the United States.
In the U.S., a new bulletin tonight amid this Israeli war. Tonight, there is new concern that Iranian-backed hackers might have targeted the water supply system near Pittsburgh. The ominous message sent about using equipment made by Israel.
So, blinking red lights analogy about 9/11, all the lights were blinking red before 9/11. Apparently, obviously, all of us missed it. Would you say that there's multiple blinking red lights out there?
I see blinking lights everywhere I turn.
Second set of attacks we're tracking is an increase by Iran in cyber attacks against 10 water systems in this country.
It took less than an hour for someone to shoot Duke Energy's electric substations in Carthage and West End, knocking out power for 45,000 people in Moore County. Court documents now reveal investigators had a person of interest within 2 days of the December 3rd attack. That man called 911, saying he was knowledgeable and willing to help with the Moore County outage. Documents say he also told a coworker he had been in communication with people connected with a group called the Moore County Patriots and that they had plans to damage substations in Moore County.
I just feel a lot of concern that 2024 may be the year of a black swan event. This is a national security event with high impact that's very hard to predict.
There has been far too little public focus on the fact that PRC hackers are targeting our critical infrastructure. Our water treatment plants, our electrical grid, our oil and natural gas pipelines, our transportation systems, and the risk that poses to every American requires our attention now. China's hackers are positioning on American infrastructure in preparation to wreak havoc and cause real-world harm to American citizens and communities if and when China decides the time has come to strike.
Now imagine that on a massive scale. Imagine not one pipeline, but many pipelines disrupted. Telecommunications going down so people can't use their cell phone. People start getting sick from polluted water. Trains get derailed. Air traffic control system, port control systems are malfunctioning. This is truly an everything, everywhere, all at once scenario.
Particularly challenging, and when I think about, another 9/11, maybe it's not through the terrorism lens, right? Like it is. Right. There are a lot of challenges that we're facing in the context of, for example, cyber.
The Biden administration is warning states to be vigilant against cyber attacks targeting the country's water systems, citing ongoing threats from the hackers who are associated with the governments of Iran and China.
But now, increasingly concerning, is the potential for a coordinated attack here in the homeland, akin to the ISIS-K attack we saw at the Russia concert hall just a couple weeks ago.
Overnight, emergency services down. 911 outages affecting parts of multiple states and even whole city police departments. As cyber attacking remains a major concern for authorities across the country. It's unclear what caused the outages, but it comes as the Department of Homeland Security has told officials to be on the lookout for cyber threats. The government warning in the past that there's an increased risk of cyber attacks to 911 services.
As we reported Monday, the Environmental Protection Agency warned that cyber attacks against water utilities are becoming more frequent and more damaging nationwide. The agency is now urging systems to take immediate actions to protect the nation's drinking water.
In NATO, we have agreed amongst all allies that in principle, a cyber attack can be the start of an Article 5 procedure.
We didn't learn a lesson from 9/11 in New York City. We'll never learn a lesson. It's frightening, and we're headed for another 9/11. I predicted that. I think we should have a secure border. We should know who's coming into our country. We don't.
Two counterterrorism specialists sounding the alarm of a possible terrorist attack right here in the United States. One they say could be worse than 9/11. A former FBI agent and Twin Towers first responder told the Daily Mail they blame the large number of unvetted foreign nationals entering through the U.S.-Mexico border. Last week, 8 Tajikistan nationals with ties to ISIS crossed the southern border, passed security checks, and were released before being arrested by ICE after an FBI tip.
New alarm bells about the threat of terrorism in America from a former top intelligence official. Warning in Foreign Affairs, the United States faces a serious threat of a terrorist attack in the months ahead. Former acting CIA Director Michael Morell with national security expert Graham Allison comparing the current threat level to the run-up to 9/11.
An 18-year-old is accused in a plot to destroy a PSE&G power plant in New Jersey. Federal prosecutors say Andrew Taxistov of East Brunswick was arrested Wednesday at Newark Airport as he was on his way to Ukraine to join the Russian Volunteer Corps. Authorities say the suspect recruited an undercover agent online and then traveled to 2 different electrical substations in North Brunswick and also New Brunswick.
A deadly terrorist attack could happen here in America in the near future. That's the word from national security insiders. Their concerns are similar to the warnings before 9/11.
At this point, they're in the planning stages or in the operational phase where they're looking at targets. If I'm a terrorist leader, I don't attack before that. I get everything in place. You know, we see what happens with the election. I'll have people harass polling sites and keep people from voting on election day.